Before we get started, Profit Boss, I want you to know that I'm over here cracking the champagne and toasting to you and to me and celebrating with trumpets and fanfare. We have made it to 100,000 downloads in just 10 months of being on the air. So I'm touched. I'm moved. I want to thank you for your loyalty. 100,000 episodes of Profit Boss Radio have been listened to, and I couldn't be more blown away. I'm proud of you and of me. And so this is our little celebration party. Thank you.
Welcome to Profit Boss Radio, where successful women have paved the road to their own financial freedom. Each week, your host, Hillary Hendershot, financial coach, money mindset expert, and experienced wealth manager, will help you discover the keys to the wealth and peace of mind you want and deserve in her no-nonsense and authentic style. Starting right now.
Hi, I'm Hillary Hendershot. This is episode 49 of Profit Boss Radio. This is the New Year's episode. You're downloading this when it comes out. It's the Tuesday before New Year's 2016. And I have for you a very lighthearted show today, but actually I do get a little sentimental about New Year's Eve. First of all, I love the idea of putting the past behind me and creating and living into a new future that inspires me. And so New Year's is pretty much the obvious day of the year to do that. Although I definitely do not reserve my putting the past in the past habits for New Year's. I try to do it as often as possible, but it's always been a holiday that I celebrated and thought about and have been a little, you could say, it's not sensitive or emotional, like more like inspired about. And one of the things I did in 2016 was I created a word or a phrase, a theme for my year. And that theme was keep an empowered context. And what that means is to, often in life, we have the opportunity to perceive things that come at us in a negative way or in a positive way. And the same event can be interpreted very differently by different people. And so I was determined to be and become someone who perceived things as being in my favor, perceive the world as a friendly, supportive place. And, I launched this podcast in February, and I adore every one of you who listen. And I had a baby and went on maternity leave and built a team that supported me. And the podcast went on and my business ran in my absence with no problem, no hiccups. So definitely kept an empowered context around those things. I paid myself more from the business this year than I ever have. I fully funded my retirement account. So lots of good things happen. I will not say that I have got to the point where I am immune, maybe not perceiving things naturally as being in my favor, although I'm more willing to go that route. But man, it has been a journey. So what's your theme for 2017? I'd love to hear from you in the Profit Boss Facebook group, or just shoot me an email at info@hillaryhendershot.com. What's your theme for 2017? Mine is expansion. So expanding my mind, expanding who I am as a leader, expanding the entertainment value of the podcast, expanding my audience, and also, as I've mentioned a few times on the show, sort of expanding some of the things that I'm doing, including hosting my first live event, the Profit Boss Live Conference. Today's guest is Jessica Kupferman. She's a friend and a colleague, and she and I were talking actually about me doing some advertising on other podcasts, and I realized that she has the inside scoop on how women are making money with podcasting. She is the host of the She Podcasts group and brand and podcast. And so her community with almost 5,000 members is full of female podcasters, and she is an agent who can work placement and negotiate deals for advertising on podcasts. And she was the host of the very successful Lady Business Radio, where she conducted over 150 interviews of entrepreneurs that you've probably heard of, like Tori Johnson from Good Morning America and Lori Cheek from Shark Tank. She currently runs the JK Media Agency. So my thought for this show, and why I actually moved episodes around so that I could make room for it in the lineup to get it in 2017, is because one of the things that I know is probably top of mind for many of you is how can you make more money? Maybe you've pared down your expenses to, where you can live comfortably, and you need to expand the top line. And I think podcasting can be one of those opportunities. It's new. The systems aren't set. It's an undefined industry. And, my experience with podcasting has been fantastic. And I think it can really give rise to, I think once your mind gets started working in a creative way, these things can really snowball. So I brought Jessica in to talk about what it's like to podcast, what it takes, how to do it well, and kind of the pitfalls to stay away from, and also how the reason why paying attention to the champions of podcasting is probably a bad idea for you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Profit Boss Radio. Jessica Kupferman. Do you go by Jess or Jessica?
Either. Anything but Jessie.
Okay. Jess, welcome to Profit Boss Radio, to our New Year episode.
Thanks. Can I call you Hills? What's your nickname?
You can't call me Hills. Hill is fine. No? Not Hilly. Not Hilly.
No, that's true. That's an old lady, Hilly.
Yes.
Midwest. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today and your listeners.
Yeah, I love to do shows because I think some women get stuck thinking they don't know how to make money on the side or do side gigs or what they could transition to. And so I think the process of sort of spoon feeding people, look, here's what some people are doing, whether that's selling isogenics or podcasting on the side, can stimulate thinking. So I was excited when I'm talking with you, and I think you and I were talking online about how people are actually making money with podcasting. And of course, obviously there's the self-interest in that conversation for me too. So let's just start. How did you get started with podcasting?
So I started, this story. So as a kid, I always pretended to have my own game show, and this doesn't really count, but it's important to the story because I've been on some kind of stage almost my entire life. Like, my parents threw me into tap dancing classes and theater, like the second I could talk. And I've been on stage ever since. When I went to college, it ceased a little. And that's not even true. I was in an a cappella group in college. I wasn't acting, but I was singing and stuff. And then,
wow, so you can sing.
That's what they tell me.
A cappella is no joke. Yeah.
Yeah. It was the 90s, so we did Pearl Jam and Live and Alice Chains. We did a little bit of some 80s stuff, maybe some Indigo Girls.
Did you do Belle Biv DeVoe?
No, but that's my favorite karaoke song is Poison. That's my go-to karaoke song. How did you know?
I love that song. It so reminds me of my high school prom.
Me too. It's the best. Okay, so I finished college, and then theater and acting and being on stage and speaking, it just kind of ceased to exist. I was just trying to I had little kids, and I was just trying to get by. I had kids really young right out of college. I started my own business, and I liked it. It was going well, but I started to really miss kind of being on the stage, and I felt like that was the thing missing for my business. I was a designer and a consultant, and I never really got to speak to large groups all at once, and people were always telling me that I should speak or do webinars and this and that. So I happened to be on my friend Anastasia Valentine's show. I don't even remember the name of it right now, but at the end of it, it was a half hour long. She had different segments. Here's the news. Now we'll talk about tech. Here's where we do this. And I was like, she's a flipping genius. I want my own show like this. So I immediately became obsessed with what my show was going to be, what I was going to call it, how it would be different. Right at the time, the only entrepreneurial shows were Smart Passive Income, Entrepreneur on Fire, and they were very much dude cast, so to speak. At the time, Entrepreneur on Fire, he wasn't interviewing a lot of women. Pat wasn't interviewing a lot of women. And I was in B School, Marie Forleo's B School. I had already been in it for 2 years. I knew a lot of smart women, a lot of women who had amazing stories. Christina Rasmussen, who started this huge movement called Second First for people who lose a family member.
Yeah, I've met her actually.
Yeah, she's amazing. Mm-hmm. Nutritionists and tech geniuses and branding geniuses. And I thought, they're not interviewing Marie and Danielle Laporte and all these other people. I'm going to interview them, but I'm not going to have any preset questions like John. And I'm going to ask them stuff that everybody else wants to ask them. I'm not going to ask them about their success because they've already said that a million times. I want to ask them personal stuff. And so I got to ask Pam Slim, when she goes on book tours, does the husband get pissed? I got to ask Mari Smith what it was like to have such a public divorce because she's relatively famous and got divorced right after she became relatively famous. So, I got to ask them really, personal things. And so that was my show, Lady Business Radio. I did it for 2 years. In the middle of that 2 years, I was at New Media Expo to try and get a leg up on Lady Business Radio. I wanted it to get a little farther, a little faster, a little further. And so I remember I passed John Lee Dumas in the hall and I was like, how do I get more downloads? And he didn't even ask me what my show was. He goes, how long is your show? I said, it's like an hour. He goes, cut it in half, make it 2 shows a week. And I was like, well, that's not exactly all right, thanks. And then and Elsie was there and a couple other women podcasters were there, like Maggie, like people who, Elsie was like a hardcore, she works for Libsyn, but other people were there. And I was just like, this is advice he gave me. I don't know what that means. And she was, and they gave me the advice I wanted to know. So I came home from that and started a group called She Podcast just for women. No men allowed. I don't want any man answers in this group. Like that, right? And only women. So I was like, as soon as I added Elsie, 100 other women were in there because she knows everyone in podcasting. And about a few months after the group started, she asked me to start doing a show called She Podcast. And I'm like, sure, what the hell? We'll just do it for fun. We won't care how it works out, whatever. And the second I started, I got pregnant. So I was, pregnant the entire time we started the first show, that second show. And I was still doing Lean Business Radio, winding them both down so I could go on maternity. And while I was on maternity, a weird thing happened. I had 2 Facebook groups. I had She Podcast, which had about 500 people in it, and I had Lady Business Radio, which had about 800. It was called the Lady Business Bomb Squad. That group became dead silent without me in there. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't supporting each other. Nothing. The She Podcast group, though, in the 3-4 months I was gone, doubled in size and became so active that Elsie was like juggling 18 balls in the air trying to manage it all. And you can hear when I come back to the show, she literally is like, thank God you're back. She was so excited because it had become unmanageable. And since then, that was only 2 years ago, it went from 1,500 to now almost 5,000 women.
And why do you think that is?
I think when I started podcasting, 13% of women made up podcasters. It was mostly men. And I'd like to say that I was a big part in it, but regardless of whether I was or not, I think over the course of the last couple of years, women realized that it's not as hard as you think. It seemed like a nerdy, techie, geeky thing to do at first, but the more you realize who's doing it, the more you're just like, I could have my own show. No one else is talking about this. I'm the only person that knows how to talk about that. Or, they get the message that they're the only person who has their own outlook on a subject, which is true, and they start or are thinking about starting a show. Now, I don't think all 5,000 women in there have a live show. I think most of them are probably thinking about it in some phase of procrastinating.
I think some of them want to be guests on shows, and
they're not. It's really technically not allowed if that's true. If they don't have a show, they're not really supposed to be in there. But I can't go through I do vet the people who come in, but only for spam.
Right.
I don't always look to see, do they have a show yet? Because if they're starting one, I can't keep them out. But you're right. It's probably not.
So I didn't think starting my podcast was too hard because I had the vision of what I wanted. If you listen to this show, I could talk forever about the topic and I can react to the news and I can answer questions. Just for me, the ability to talk about it goes on and on and on. It does not end. So that is a feather in my cap as it regards being a podcaster. But I also paid a production company to take care of the nuts and bolts for me. So let's assume
it makes a big difference.
Yeah, but I paid a good amount of money. So can they launch it on their own or do they need to pay for a production? How hard is it or how much money would it take to learn the technical bits of how to launch a podcast?
It's really free. Elsie and I have a free download that teaches you how to get your show up and running.
Really? I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. It's shepodcast.com/101. And it's about 17 videos that will teach you how to do start to finish what you need, what you don't need. So it's not hard and it's not expensive to get it up. The hard part, I think, is making it successful. But so anyway, so back to Lady Business Radio. It's funny that you said that about, you could talk about it all the time. I got sick of having those conversations. After I had the baby, I was just different. And so when I came back, she was grateful that I was back, but I didn't want to interview women entrepreneurs anymore. I was getting pitched like crazy. I felt like all the pitches were the same. I didn't know any of these people. I felt like they were just kind of trying to use my show for fame. I don't know. I lost my taste for it.
Yeah.
And so I started working on the other thing with Elsie. So I don't know if you do. Oh, obviously you do interviews. Duh. Because you're interviewing me.
I do
the hell's wrong
interviews,
with me?
you know, and I somehow ended up on a PR list. So I get a bunch of emails from PR folks, which maybe 1 in 10 are some kind of interesting to me. To tell you the truth, sometimes I take, because they always have statistics in their emails. Sometimes I'll just take and use their statistics in a blog post or in my show. And I sometimes get pitches, but people want to talk about their business. And this is a show about money. It's not about business. And that's what makes me different.
Like I was getting pitched like crazy and I just was like, I was super over it. So, but really I originally started podcasting to add an element to my business that wasn't there, which was making me look like an expert, making me look like Betty Big Deal, and giving people an opportunity to get to know me and my personality through my interviews with these other people, because you can blog all day, but there is something intimate about hearing. And when people tell you you have a great voice or you're funny or you're this and you're that, it's impossible to show as an online entrepreneur. It's impossible to show in everyday life.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's people like Ash Ambridge who somehow have the ability to write and be funny, but I just don't have that.
She's hilarious.
Yeah, she is.
But I don't have any idea what she's like. I mean, I interviewed her and it was a great interview. Some of it was over my head because she's actually a professional linguist.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so I was just like, some of it was over my head as far as like speech and speaking and writing. But yeah, that's not to say we know. I mean, what if she could translate that into a podcast? Like, would she explode even more, or would it be like, would it kill it? Because her wordsmithing is scientific. Whereas like for me, I feel like this is the part where I get scientific. Elsie and I were literally just talking about it when we were recording right before this. I can go from thought to speech smoothly and still sound intelligent. Like I'm making all this up as I go along. None of it's in front of me. I didn't even really read, no offense, the prep email because I don't want to know what the questions are. I'd rather just have you have my, like off the cuff answer because that's what I'm good at.
So and that's another, skill set.
I think you need that skill. I do.
Yes.
Don't you?
Well, when I do solo episodes, I do take notes. I certainly have, right now I don't have any notes, but for example, I have an interview. I'm going to be on somebody else's show. So she's interviewing me in a half an hour and she sent me the questions. And just like you, I don't really look at them. I know what I want to say well enough, right? I've said it 1,000 times at this point, but you have to have that confidence and that willingness to open up your mouth and have sounds come out.
Yeah, I think over planning. When you do a solo show, yes, because otherwise you stutter. I stutter. But I think that, the skill of being well spoken and articulate is important.
Okay, good. So the technicals can be bought and paid for. You can do that. It's time intensive, but you're trading time for money. So you can either pay a production company or you can do it yourself. But the point is, it's not out of reach.
So the people who are listening to this, they mostly have a business, correct?
No,
or is it just
we're about 60-40 full-time employees versus full-time entrepreneurs.
Okay. So that's interesting. So I assumed because it's Profit Boss that they were bosses.
Well, so that's what the whole thing is about. So profit is the difference between revenue and cost in your business. It's that margin, that thing you get to pay yourself with. And so Profit Boss is about having margin in your life. It's about spending less than you make and building wealth and like that. So it's money. It's not business. Yeah.
I like it. Smart. So the question is like to make money podcasting. The trick, I think, to making money podcasting, well, there's a few tricks, but the main one is to really know what you're talking about in your show. Even if you're the interviewer, you can't interview people about money and not know about money, right? This isn't so you can learn about money. That would make no sense.
Right.
It has to be that you know what you're talking about, whether it's a solo show or an interview show. The trick is to at least know about your part so that when you are engaging in the conversation, you don't sound like your answers aren't, ooh, interesting every time.
Now, right. I hate that when I listen to podcasts and the interviewer says, awesome, after everything the guests say. So
I don't think they're listening.
I just think they don't have that gift of gab that we've sort of been talking about. So what's the most niched show that you've seen be successful?
I love this question. It's so good. Okay. It's so good because now I'm an agency and I represent shows and help find them sponsors and advertisers. So this is a funny question for me because, so for example, there's a show called Coroner Talk, which is I'm not kidding. It is for death investigators, coroners, forensic analysts. It's 10,000 downloads a month. Now, in a bigger picture where you're like when you are talking about shows that are getting hundreds of thousands, like Serial, okay, but that's a coroner.
Right.
It's coroner talk, people. I am not joking. Not even joking.
I mean,
or like,
there have to be podcasts on everything from beekeeping to quilting, right? I mean,
here's another one, Whitetail Rendezvous, about deer hunting. This one, it's about it's like same amount. There's one, the paranormal podcast, which is 300 downloads, 300,000.
Paranormal, that's not that fringe. That's a whole subgenre.
No, you're right. What about show about fantasy football for women? 14,000 downloads a month.
Okay,
Fish Nerds is 5,000 downloads a month. And let me tell you something. Even though that's half of the other guy, I reached out to like 20 advertisers. I'm now fighting them off. It's about fishing.
Well, yeah, because you know what? People who fish have money because they're not working.
True, but also how many fishing podcasts are there?
I don't know. How many are there?
None. Oh. This guy. Golf. There's one about golf, 11,000 a month. There's one I do called Creepy Kingdom. This one is pretty niche, Hillary. It's about all the creepy aspects of Disney.
Okay, so, that's bizarre.
You can talk about Disney, but this is just the evil villainy parts of Disney. There's no small world after all in this podcast.
And that's great. We were just talking before we went live, before we started recording, about newsjacking. And that's a great example of newsjacking because that show gets to sort of stand on the shoulders of the media and fame of Disney.
Well, now that's every show also about a television show. So I also represent a show about Once, Mr. Roboto. There's a couple of those that I do.
There's a show about The Walking Dead.
Outlander, yeah. Game of Thrones, there's tons, and they're great. Oh, what about Ben Franklin's World? That one's about early American history. She's 100,000 downloads a month.
Oh my gosh. So I think what we've discovered here is that the proliferation of podcasts give rise to this whole audience of people who prefer to listen over read for whatever reason. For me, when I'm in front of my computer, I'm always a little bit stressed out. I'm always hurried. I don't want to stop and read a blog post or crack open a book. But when I'm away from my computer, I can't read. And so I love having the podcasts that I can turn on in my ear. It's customized, to me, to my selections. And I think that all of us podcasters are catering to this new, it's not a new audience, but it's a new way the audience is being served.
Yeah, now you're kind of getting into my spiel that I give advertisers about why podcast advertising is so awesome. And you hit on a really good one. It's not even that first of all, they're mobile. So you have their undivided attention. They're running, driving, cleaning, working, whatever they're doing. And actually, if you think about it, that's why fishing and hunting, that's brilliant, because what else are they doing but sitting in the freaking forest or in a boat waiting for a fish? They're perfect. So not only do you have their undivided attention, but look at how much work it takes to pick out a show, download it, subscribe it. These are people who have really invested in listening. So those 10,000 people or the 5,000 people who are listening to that show have made a specific effort to consume that content. It's not like flipping through. You can't flip through podcasts like you can television or radio or a magazine or anything else. You can flip a channel like that. Podcast listeners do not do that.
Right.
They listen from top to bottom, left to right.
Yeah, it's pretty rare that I'll fast forward through an episode.
Well, so as a result, it makes advertising and people who advertise on those shows, like those advertisers clean up because they have such an engaged audience. So the question, can you make money with podcasting? That reason that the listeners are so engaged and involved applies to any way you would make money podcasting. So it's not just about advertising, although that's the thing I talk about the most. But let's say you want to sell your own book. Of course they're going to download your book because you say at the end of every show, don't forget I have a book.
Right.
Right. And so why would they not download your book? Or let's say you want to all go to Scotland, like the Outlander podcast. I think she's going to start doing fan sponsored trips to Scotland. Hell yeah, I would do that with the person telling me about each show every week, like about Scotland and all my favorite characters from Outlander. Or there's a guy who does Walt Disney World. So Walt Disney World Radio, he was a lawyer in New Jersey and he just loved Disney World. Mm-hmm. So he just, for a creative outlet, he started talking about all the crap he loved at Walt Disney World. And then he started going to they plan like 4 trips a year with his family. And so he started going there. And then as his show grew, he started having these little fan meetups. Hey, if you listen to the show, I'm going to be there in the spring. We can hang out and have a dinner. Well, that's now his full-time job. He now lives in Orlando. He quit being a lawyer. And all he does is events for his listeners at Walt Disney World.
Oh my gosh.
And he doesn't pay for any of the services that you and I pay for because his fans volunteer to run his social media and edit his show and do all this other stuff. Yes, that's right.
I love it. So,
I know, right?
so you can make money selling advertising on your show, or you can sell, but people are selling like all kinds of things. It seems like things that weren't even being sold before, like trips to Ireland about a TV show.
Well, okay. So you don't know Outlander, but it's set in Scotland.
Oh, is it Scotland?
It's set in Scotland. It was a book. It's 9 books that have been turned into a series. People really love the books. I mean, yeah.
I think I started reading the first one.
It's like, imagine if you watched Game of Thrones and you had an opportunity to go see where it was all happening. Like, it's kind of exciting. It's the same as the Walt Disney. So yeah, so there's advertising and sponsorship, and then there's live events, and they can either happen at a place similar to where you're speaking, like Outlander, or if your whole show is about Disney, yes, you would have events at Disney. That just stands to reason. I mean, if you wanted to have an event, what I would do if I were Hillary Hendershot is I would have events where I spoke about this topic, live events where like 100 people or 1,000 people come together in one room and you have speakers to talk about this issue and topic. That's
funny that you mentioned that because I'm doing that in 2017.
Hey. Pre-commercial. I had no idea. That is one way to make money with your podcast. So Elsie and I have started to do that too with our show. We have events at podcast functions. Sometimes they're tied into the event. Sometimes they're not. So we did one that was tied into Podcast Movement. It went okay. Then the next year we went to Podcast Movement and saw clients 101 together. So it was like, work with Elsie 101. If you're already in Chicago, here's the price, sign up. We got a bunch of clients that way. Now in Orlando in the spring, we're doing like a 1-day event tied to the event. And then, and then a Podcast Movement, which is in Anaheim, we'll probably do the same thing. Like if you want to work with one of us or both of us, here's where you sign up. And so having events is a nice way, but let's just say you like to do, I don't know. It could be anything. I'm trying to think of an example of somebody who's listening who doesn't have a business. Like what would they talk about, for example?
Well, maybe a hobby or
let's say beading.
BEAD, beading.
Yeah.
Okay.
My mother was into beading. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just say you're a beader, which is a name of things, of people that do things,
yes.
Or an Etsy, or somebody who has an Etsy show, store.
Yeah.
And it's all about making jewelry with beads. Well, so if you wanted to make money, you would have in-person lessons, or you could make money. Obviously selling your jewelry, or if you wanted to have a meetup at they have, believe it or not, huge beading trade shows where you go and see all the other beads and like stare at all the beads and like get patterns of crap that you can make. Let's not get into how silly I think it is. I'm just saying, a hobbyist can still make money either selling their hobby, lessons on how to make oh my God, that just reminded me of a show that was in my course, Podcasting School for Women, Blacksmith Her, a show for women blacksmiths.
No.
And she would sell, what was she selling on that show? It was like, she would partner with people who made templates and kind of like sewing patterns, but for blacksmithers, people who sold tools and hammers. Yes.
It's incredible because I was listening to someone talk about all the algorithms that control organic reach now, and how if you're on Facebook, it doesn't matter because if you don't pay, no one's going to see your stuff. And there are no algorithms with podcasting. And so I think what you're talking about is, these people who are first to market, like this person who's first to market with a blacksmithing show for women. Obviously that's a deep, deep niche. I have no interest in it, but the people
She's still doing it. Blacksmither.com.
Amazing.
It is amazing. And you know what she did? A membership.
And what do you get with the membership?
I have no idea.
Okay.
So she has an online blacksmithing class. Okay. So she's selling that. And then she probably partnered with Abana, ABANA. And she says, click here to join a bond. Oh, it's the Artist Blacksmiths Association of North America. So that's not exactly her membership. But her original idea, I think, was to have a membership where different people would come in and do different lessons. It would be like if you sold a membership for $30 a month, and for $30, you would have experts like me talk about, like once a month, like I'll come in and talk about podcasting, and someone else will come in and talk about branding, and someone else will come in and talk about real estate investments. Someone else will come in and talk about checkbooks and savings accounts or whatever. And then you get, 100 people and you're making $3,000 a month.
I heard at a conference actually last year that in order to sell advertising on your show, you had to have 50,000 downloads a month. And I ran with that number until I think I just was participating with you in a conversation online in one of our groups on Facebook. And you said, no, that's not true at all. In fact, I personally know that people are selling advertising with less than that. So could you give my listeners a sense of kind of how those advertising numbers can work?
Okay, so with my first show, Lady Business, let's go back to that. My first show, Lady Business Radio, I'm not from the radio industry. I did used to sell advertising. And so once I had a woman say, I want to advertise my MailChimp course on your show, how much would it be? I didn't even look at my downloads because what's the point? I just was kind of like, okay, I will mention your show, I will tweet about it, and I will post about it on Facebook for $250 a month. She was like, great, let's do it. I just made it up. It felt right. I mean, it felt like the right price.
You just made it up.
I just really made it up. And then there are some shows. Okay, so certain advertisers. So now that I have an agency, I don't do that anymore because you really can't. I try to use a method where you're selling per 1,000 downloads per show. However, if you do that every time, like Fish Nerds, for example, he's getting a consistent 500 to 1,000 downloads a week. He has one big show, one little show a week. But his advertisers are going to be willing to pay more than like if I were to sell. So I know it's complicated, but let's say it's a CPM, which is cost per 1,000. And a normal CPM is $30 per 1,000 downloads per episode. Mm-hmm. So if you have a small show that's only getting 1,000 per episode, then technically you can only make $120 a month. But I don't believe in that because this guy who's talking about fishing is the only show. It doesn't matter how many people are listening. It's worth more. He's only able to advertise 3 or 4 spots per show. So if you only charge $120, I mean, it's like supply and demand. Whereas on Serial, those guys can afford to charge $30 per CPM because it's it's millions of downloads a month. Like they're still going to make tons and tons and tons of money. But small shows with a niche audience, you can sort of be like, well, Clay needs to make X amount of dollars to pay the bills. And if we have 3 shows, all right, so one spot on his show per month is about $300. I mean, yeah, the CPM is very high. The cost per 1,000 is very high, but he has a very large social, I add social media reach, and then sometimes we add in integrated content too, and that will make the price higher as well.
And that means maybe there's a blog post about you on their blog, or example, if you're the advertisee, if you're the show that's advertising, you might mention them on your podcast, you might advertise them on your blog, and you might introduce them in your Facebook group.
So yes, there's also some other creative ways to do that. So let's just say you have a pretty large Instagram following, but you just started your podcast, but you want to charge more for advertising. So if you got, for example, a monthly box to give you $500 a month to do HelloFresh, for example, you could do an unboxing on Instagram. You could cook it on Instagram. You could eat it on Instagram. All of that is an example of integrated content. If it's not a box per month, what if it's like makeup? What if you, Hillary, like the Benefit Cosmetics, and rather than just say how great they are, you go out and get a lipstick, or they send you some stuff and you talk about each product and what you like about it every time. I mean, and then what if you did an email once a month? I just wanted to tell you a little bit about this, pore refining, whatever. My pores are completely gone. It's the best thing ever. There's all kinds of ways that you can integrate sponsors without the audience really being privy to the fact that you're selling them. You're just excited about what you're selling. And in the most cases, you get advertisers, you pitch people that you're excited about. So you're not stuck talking about, Casper mattresses, which you could really care less about.
Right.
So,
and that kind of blends into being more of a brand partnership. Is that what
it's like an ambassador. Yeah. You basically are, and I mean, make it up, but don't get crazy. Make it up because your audience has value. Oh, here's another example. Medicare Nation. It's not a big show, but she works with the government and they sponsor it sometimes and they give her $1,200 a month. And I think her show's like a couple thousand downloads a month. She doesn't have any concept of CPM. She just was like, in order to put you on Medicare Nation and you can let the 2,000 people who need Medicare listen to your message, here's what it's going to cost you. And they're like, here you go.
Wow.
So, I mean, to say that you need 50,000 downloads per episode or per month is preposterous. It's crazy talk.
So far, all the shows we've talked about, with the exception of Medicare Nation, most of the shows we've talked about have integrated not just the on podcast, but also the off podcast kind of business. For example, the trips to Scotland, the trips to Disney World, like that. So, I mean, I know, for example, somebody like John Lee Dumas, I've read that he generates $50,000 a month in advertising and $300,000 a month in course sales. But I think it's a mistake to try to learn from someone like that because they're just like in the stratosphere and you can't learn from someone who's 100 steps ahead of you. So
yeah, in a lot of ways, that's true. In a lot of ways, what they're doing, his course sales are often made up of people trying to emulate and not like just learn. Like I read his ebook and I applied the knowledge he gave me to my own idea. A lot of people try to take his idea and make it apply to their topic, and it's a mistake. It's a huge mistake. So yes, most people cannot make all their money with advertising. So there is selling a service, selling products. Sometimes people, if you have a comedy show, most comedy podcasts either make money by asking for a donation. They also will have a VIP membership where they take all their older episodes and put them behind a paywall. Another thing they do is make t-shirts and hats and swag with their show name on it. And that's a way to do things. Like if let's say you're a life coach. Yeah, I mean, let's say you're a life coach and you're teaching people to live life to the fullest. If you made swag with that on there, probably sell that and have a business. And then there's a membership site. We talked about that. Live events. We talked about that. And then speaking. Actually, you could also turn podcasting itself into a job. So part of why I started my first show was also to launch my speaking career. And that really helped a lot. Because people could hear what I sound like when I was speaking and get a sense of my personality and what I would be like in front of an audience. And they started asking me to speak here and there. So if you wanted to be a speaker, a podcast is a good place to start. Also, if you want to be, a professional podcaster. So I know you and I were talking about a podcast before this of someone who reads blog posts.
Yes.
But actually, there are podcasters I know who get paid professionally to read blogs as a podcast. Like, I think Dave Jackson was paid by a big blog. I don't think it was HuffPo, but it was somebody.
Oh my gosh, to turn their web presence into a podcast.
Yes.
Genius.
And so if you have the voice for that and you're interested in making podcasting your living, you could do that. You could also be a voice actor and use your podcast as sort of like a stepping stone for that.
Okay, so what are the podcasters doing now who are growing? Besides me, what are the podcasters doing now who are growing their shows the fastest? How are they growing?
I think they're growing by growing their social media. I always say that the way to get more listeners is more eyeballs because everyone is on social media. Not everyone is on like iTunes and podcasting all the time. So you have to introduce them to it by enticing them on social media to check out what you're doing in iTunes.
So we're still in a position of having to convert. That really is the wall for podcasters to climb, is the wall of adoption, because we have to get people into their podcast app.
Or even get it to listen to it on a website. Get them to listen in general is still, I think that's still the barrier to entry for most people. Yeah. Because people who, Fisherman is a good example. Again, those who listen, but the ones who don't are the people who probably can't work their voicemail either because all they're doing is fishing. They don't do the technical thing. They don't have email. They don't check email. You know what I mean? I read somewhere, was it Donald Trump? No, I know, it was Iris Apfel. She's a 90-something-year-old fashion icon, and she doesn't even own a computer. And she has a social media presence. She pays other people to do it. But like people like that are not going to listen to, like not everyone who you want to listen will listen. If they're already on Facebook in Facebook groups, you pop in there and you go, oh, hey, I talk about this in my podcast. Here's the episode. And, and you can give them the download right to download it in iTunes. You give it to the show notes in your websites. They can like check it out or whatever. But yeah, getting people to listen is still the hardest thing. And I think the way to do that is to keep growing your Facebook and your Twitter presence and whatever other, I guess Instagram if your audience is on Instagram. I happen to not like Instagram, but.
Aren't you on Instagram?
Yes, I am, but it annoys me. That's all. It's annoying. It's like all of our fake personalities are on there.
That's what I think about our personal Facebook pages. So if you're listening,
really? I'm always myself on Facebook.
You are.
Who the hell?
But I stopped posting altogether around the presidential election. I haven't got ramped back up.
It's not even, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about starting a podcast, there are some basic things you need to start with. You have to have, some body of knowledge. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to have a body of knowledge on a topic. If you're going to be doing a solo show, you have to be an expert or at least be funny because a lot of it is, they call it edutainment. Right? Infotainment?
Yes, infotainment, edutainment, yes.
Half entertainment, half education. I like to say mine's a third inspiration. And you got to know kind of what format you want to do. And you have to be willing or able to either pay for a production company to launch it or to take the time to learn how to do it yourself. But then it seems like the world is your oyster because you can market and sell almost anything your audience wants. And
you just have to be motivated. It's not going to be handed to you. It wasn't handed to John.
Right.
Following John doesn't mean it's going to be handed to you like it was to John. It's a lot of hard work. Everything I mentioned from products and services to all of it takes a lot of hard work and all of it takes a dedication to keeping your audience growing. You can't just speak and expect people to flock to you. It doesn't work that way. You have to hustle.
Yeah, that's good. Is hustle your word for 2017?
Hustle with muscle. Yes.
Oh, nice.
You like that?
I love it.
I just made that up, but I think I'm going to adopt it.
That's my theme. Sometimes I say that to my husband when he's cleaning the house. Come on, hustle.
Oh, every day I'm hustling.
Hustling.
Yeah.
All right. So if you're listening to this episode, I hope it's inspiring you as the clock ticks down on 2017, you can have and do and make what you want. Thanks for being a profit boss and a very happy new year to you. Jess, is there a way to say happy new year in Yiddish?
Yes. Hold on. It's Hebrew, and I believe it's Lashana Tova, which is Hebrew, and that's usually reserved for like Rosh Hashanah. That's our New Year.
Oh, so you wouldn't even say that on December 31st. You would
but you might say L'chaim, which means to life, like as a toast.
I have heard that.
Yeah. Other than that, not really.
There you go. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
Profit Boss, thanks for making it to the end of another episode of PBR. I have been doing a lot of thinking about you. I'm thinking about how hard it can be to change old habits. I mean, sometimes I think how nice it would be if things worked like they did for Keanu Reeves in those Matrix movies. If we could just lie back in an industrial punk rock barber chair and have a little cable plugged into the backs of our necks and just instantly become the masters of our financial domains. That would be kind of perfect, right? Except for the part about having the cable plugged into the back of your neck and the whole industrial punk thing. And Keanu Reeves is so annoying when you get right down to it. But I think it's important to form new habits, especially ones as fun as being alerted when new episodes of Profit Boss Radio go live. You want to know a secret? This is one habit that's almost no work at all. All you have to do is head over to iTunes, find the Profit Boss Radio channel, and hit subscribe. That's it. Then each week, you'll automatically find the latest episode ready and waiting on your favorite device. And the best part is that subscribing to Profit Boss Radio is just the beginning of other wonderful habits, like taking control of your money and learning how to build wealth or starring in your own reality show. Well, maybe not that one, unless it's on YouTube and self-produced. But plenty of great stuff is sure to happen when you subscribe. So what are you waiting for?
Thank you for listening to Profit Boss Radio, where creating success on our own terms happens every day. You're not alone in your journey to a rich life, and that's why Hillary is here to add value in each and every episode. See you next time on the podcast for women and money.